Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Did you know most wildfires happen in spring? It's because the grass and trees are so dry. Protect your home with what they call a defensible space. Remove spruce trees and tall grass within 15 feet. And move firewood 30 feet away. Clean out yucky rain gutters too. Doing this made our house up to 5 times more likely to survive a wildfire. That's good news for me and Max. Wildfires happen. Be ready. Brought to you by the Anchorage Fire Department.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service, and we'll get started by taking a look at our watches and warnings map. And what we have going on is red flag watch warnings down in the Bristol Bay area, lower Kuskokwim Valley, as well as the upper Kuskokwim Valley, right on across into the central interior here into the Tanana Valley. And these are all basically through tomorrow evening, and some of them even into Wednesday afternoon, because of the low humidities and or combination of low humidities and strong winds. We're also going to have some red flag warnings down on the Kenai Peninsula, as well as in the Susitna Valley, again for low humidities in those areas. In the Copper River Basin, we do have a watch out. Same thing with the Palmer-Wasilla area in the Matanuska Valley there, where we have a watch out for basically tomorrow and into Wednesday because of low humidities, as well as the combination of potentially strong winds with that. So things are kind of a little dangerous out there on the fire weather world. Taking a look at the fire danger itself, we have high fire danger down in the Iliamna area towards Port Allsworth there. High fire danger basically from Kenai north on the Kenai Peninsula right on up through the Anchorage area into the Palmer-Wasilla area. And the fire danger is somewhat moderate up into the Susitna Valley. Same thing in the Copper River Basin. On the north side of the Alaska Range, high fire danger basically there right on up into the Fairbanks and Tanana Valley region. So taking a look now at the satellite imagery to see what's going on. We're taking a look now at the imagery over the North Pacific. And as we put the loop in motion, you can see we have a storm system out there that's been producing rainy, windy conditions across the western to central Aleutian Islands. And then also with this, we can see this moisture plume heading right on up into the Norton Sound area, the Seward Peninsula. That's going to be feeding into this trough that's swinging down out of the Arctic to combine for some snow, as we'll talk about later in the program here. Taking a look at the state with our GO satellite imagery, put this in motion. You can see one trough is going through. Here's the next one that's going to be coming through tonight and tomorrow across the Arctic coast north of the Brooks Range, and that's going to be producing snow in those regions. Over the south central region in the eastern interior, generally cloud-free conditions. This is an infrared image, but there was a significant cloud cover in the Gulf of Alaska because of the high pressure there and basically low clouds and fog right on up into Cook Inlet. Put the loop in motion one more time. And in southeast Alaska, you see the moisture that was spreading into the Panhandle, causing some rain down in the southern Panhandle. Cloudy conditions moderating any fire danger that they did have in southeast Alaska at the beginning of the previous weekend here. Today's weather around the state, as I was saying with the satellite imagery, generally sunny conditions throughout southwest Alaska into the interior right on up into that eastern Brooks Range, even into the Yakutat area, northern portions of southeast Alaska. We did have rain that had spread on up into the southern Panhandle as well as over towards Sitka as this system approached from the south and west. Over the Bering Sea, weak high pressure, well moderate high pressure over the eastern Bering Sea. Kept some cloudy conditions there, low to mid-level clouds generally speaking. Breaks in the clouds south of the eastern Aleutian Islands in the Dutch Harbor area. And then our system out into the western Aleutian Islands brought somewhat windy conditions as well as rainy conditions over basically Adak to the Shemya area. Taking a look now at the forecast for tonight. Looking back at our system approaching the southeast Alaska with now a front associated with it. Rain is going to continue in the southern Panhandle towards the Sitka area. Cloudy conditions will spread up into the northern panhandle, Yakutat should remain cloud-free. We do expect fog to be along the North Gulf Coast down to Kodiak Island. And this is in the coastal areas. Inland, there'll be some cloud cover, but the fog is going to stay mainly along the coastal areas in the marine environment. Same thing south of the Alaska Peninsula. Up into the Cook Inlet region, likely going to see some fog again in the morning hours like we did this morning. In the interior, what's left of this trough or cold front is going to continue to swing through. There should be some isolated to scattered shower activity basically along the Yukon River Valley right on up to the eastern Brooks Range. Then up along the Arctic coast, we have this trough that's coming in from the Arctic, spreading snow along the northwest Arctic coast to Barrow. These areas you can expect about 1 to 2 inches of snow with that, and that snow will eventually push over towards the eastern portions of the north slopes of the Brooks Range, more towards the morning hours there. A mixture of rain and snow showers over this St. Lawrence Island area to the Nome area as well as Kotzebue. And up in the Kotzebue area, expect that to change to all snow showers by morning. Over in the Aleutian Islands with this low pressure system there, expect a continuation of the windy conditions as well as rainy conditions from essentially Adak west with that system. High pressure over the eastern Bering Sea, as normally would expect this time of year with high pressure. It doesn't result in clear conditions. It's a stable air mass and it keeps the clouds there. Low clouds, possibly foggy conditions as well in the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at the forecast for Tuesday. Weak low pressure just offshore of southeast Alaska is going to keep the rain going in the southern panhandle to the Sitka area. Cloudier conditions as we move further north. The fog along the outer coastal areas will persist throughout the day. Whatever fog moves inland should move offshore or dissipate as the day progresses. Same thing along the North Gulf Coast to Kodiak Island. Generally clear, sunny, warm conditions can be expected southwestern Alaska across the south central region into the Copper River Basin. As we move further north, we have what's left of our cold front kind of exiting into the Canadian Yukon Territory, but we're still expecting snow along the north slopes of the Brooks Range, right on up to the eastern Arctic coast, and in those areas for tomorrow, anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of snow is possible with that. A mixture of rain and snow as you get south of the Brooks Range, and pretty much rain showers as you move further south into the Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley. And in those areas, any rain showers are going to be relatively light to scattered type conditions. Now in the Bering Sea, we still have our high pressure system sitting in that eastern Bering Sea to northern Bering Sea over the St. Lawrence Island area. Stable air mass there is going to persist. Some foggy conditions can be expected in the Pribilof Islands. And then as we move further south to the Alaska Peninsula, expect conditions to be clearing out with fog just off the coast there. And we're going to continue to see our windy, rainy conditions out into the central Aleutian Islands in the Adak area with this frontal system sitting there with rain behind the front right around the low pressure system itself as you move on out towards the Shemya area. Taking a look now at the forecast for Wednesday. By Wednesday, things settle down in the Gulf of Alaska. We won't have any low pressure, high pressure over the Gulf. And again, for this time of year, high pressure, that marine environment, expect low clouds and fog in the outer coastal areas, but generally just low clouds. Same thing over the southeast Alaska. Foggy conditions in the inland areas in the overnight and morning hours with that fog burning off, but cloudy conditions are likely to persist. In the interior, though, where the air mass is much drier, high pressure there means we're going to see warm, sunny conditions, basically upper Yukon Valley down to the Copper River Basin, across the central interior, right on down into southwestern Alaska, the Yukon, the Kuskokwim Delta to the Bristol Bay area, as well as across the Alaska Peninsula. And we'll still have our weak high pressure over the eastern Bering Sea, so the Pribilof Islands will remain cloudy and likely see some fog there. Out into the western Bering Sea, we still have our low pressure system out there with the front. Things are weakening there. The winds are going to drop off, but we're going to see continuation of the rainy conditions basically from Adak to the west. And up along the Arctic coast, even though the snow ends, it's going to remain cloudy and still somewhat on the cool side, even though we have high pressure up in that region. Taking a look at temperatures around the state today. Southeast Alaska saw temperatures generally in the low 50s to low 60s until we got way up into the Haines, Skagway area where the temperatures were nearing 70 degrees in that sunshine. Along the coastal areas of the North Gulf Coast, temperatures were on the cool side, 40s and 50s, but once you moved inland and got away from the coast, it was a bit warmer. As you can see, at the Copper River Basin in the low 60s, up into the Susitna Valley into the low 60s as well. mid to upper 60s in the eastern interior, as well as some low 70-degree readings as you get into the Canadian Yukon territory, and over towards the Kuskokwim Valley, temperatures in the mid 60s to low 70s there. Changing our focus towards the Arctic coast, cooler conditions prevailed there, generally in the 30s, although we did see a low 40-degree reading over towards that Barter Island area. 30s right on down along the northwest Arctic coast, down into the Bering Strait, Kotzebue Sound, although a little bit further inland, mid 40s there. Norton Sound area temperatures hovered in the mid 30s, and then down towards the Yukon Delta into the low 40s to mid 40s as we get into the Kuskokwim Delta inland. Upper 30s to mid 30s along the coastal areas. The Bristol Bay area, much warmer as you moved on inland. Mid to upper 60s were prevalent in that region. Along the Alaska Peninsula's upper 40s to low 50s. In the 40s in the Pribilof Islands, eastern Aleutian Islands, as well as out towards Adak, and then 39 degrees out in the Shemya area. Taking a look at our low temperature forecast for tonight. Southeast Alaska, expect your temperatures to stay generally in the 40s, although in Yakutat, upper 30s can be expected there. Same thing as you move on towards the Cordova area and that Prince William Sound area. Upper 30s to mid 40s can be expected there in the Copper River Basin, and as we move on up into the Susitna Valley, upper 30s to low to mid 40s. Same thing in the eastern interior. Southwestern Alaska, Bristol Bay in the low 40s. 30s as we move on up into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta. Up towards the Bering Strait, temperatures dropping into the 20s. Same thing along the Arctic coast north of the Brooks Range until we get to the eastern Brooks Range, where temperatures should remain right around that freezing mark. In the Alaska Peninsula, expect your temperatures to be in the upper 30s to low 40s. Same thing along the Aleutian Islands, and temperatures dropping down to near freezing in the Pribilof Islands. For our highs tomorrow, Southeast Alaska, generally staying in the mid 50s to near 60. South Central Alaska, expect your temperatures to be in the 60s. The eastern interior, 50s to low 60s as that cloudy conditions move in. Same thing into the central interior. Southwestern Alaska, expect warm conditions like you saw today in the mid 60s, 50s along the Alaska Peninsula, and then up towards the Bering Strait, 30s and 40s along the Arctic coast. Expect your high temperatures to be in the right around that 30-degree mark up in that region. And in the Aleutian Islands, expect your temperatures to stay in the 40s. And in the Pribilof Islands, expect your temperatures to get up into the low 40s there as well. For flying weather tomorrow, Southeast Alaska and the southern panhandle, marginal to some IFR conditions off the coast. IFR conditions off the coast of Prince William Sound with marginal conditions in the Sound. That's early on. Same thing in Cook Inlet. Things will improve as the day progresses. South of Kodiak Island, marginal conditions south of the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, with marginal conditions prevalent throughout much of the Bering Sea, as well as the Aleutian Islands, with some IFR conditions over the central Aleutian Islands, and up along the Arctic coast where we're expecting that snow, expect marginal to IFR conditions in that region. Taking a look at our passes for tomorrow, Anaktuvik Pass, expect IFR conditions, as well as Adigan Pass down to the Alaska Range. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, VFR conditions as well for Rainy Pass and Windy Pass. Isabel Pass, expect VFR condition, as well as Mentasta Pass. Down to the Chugach Mountains and Tanita Pass, expect VFR conditions. VFR conditions can be expected in Portage Pass, and VFR conditions can be expected in both Chilkoot and White Pass. Take a look at our freezing levels. Freezing levels at the surface, basically at the Brooks Range, sloping to about 6,000 feet as we get down towards the south central region to 8,000 feet over southeast Alaska. And over the Aleutian Islands, freezing levels are sloping up to about 10,000 feet over the central Aleutian Islands, with 8,000 to 6,000 feet over the western Aleutian Islands. For our icing conditions tomorrow, isolated moderate rime icing from your freezing level to 18,000 feet in southern southeast Alaska and near Sitka. Some isolated moderate rime icing up along the Arctic coast and the north slopes of the Brooks Range to 11,000 feet, and out into the Aleutian Islands in the western Bering Sea. Isolated moderate rime icing from your freezing level to about 21,000 feet out there. Our jet stream starts off at about 100 knots coming off Japan, tapers off to 45 knots south of the Kamchatka Peninsula, back up to 85 to 95 knots south of the Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula, and 65 knots as it makes landfall over southeast Alaska. moving on down to the 9,000 foot level. Generally light winds over southeast Alaska and the south central region, 25 to 30 knot winds as we move on up into the interior to the Arctic coastal areas, as well as into the Bering Strait, dropping off to about 20 to 25 knots there, 10 to 15 knots over that eastern Bering Sea where we have the high pressure, out into the further out into the Aleutians in the Bering Sea where our low pressure system is. Stronger winds there at the 9,000 foot level, 40 to 50 knots over the central Aleutians, dropping off to about 25 knots over the western Aleutian Islands. And then dropping on down to the 3,000 foot mark, expect about 25 knot winds over the western Aleutian Islands to increasing to 35 knots over the central Aleutian Islands, 50 knot winds over that western Bering Sea, 20 knots as we come on across the eastern Aleutian Islands to 25 knots up across the St. Matthew Island region, 20 to 30 knot winds as we get on up into the Bering Strait to the northwest Arctic coast, light winds around our high pressure system in the Bristol Bay area and the Alaska Peninsula. Over the Gulf of Alaska, generally light winds, 15 knots over Kodiak Island, light winds over southeast Alaska until you get down towards Dixon Entrance with about 30 knot winds there. And up along the Arctic coast, expect about 20 to 30 knot winds over the northwest Arctic coast to the central Arctic coast, and then 35 knot winds as we get over that eastern Arctic coastal area, 20 knot winds in that upper Yukon Valley region. And for turbulence tomorrow, expect some moderate turbulence below 3,000 feet over the eastern Brooks Range, and also some widespread moderate turbulence below 3,000 feet over the central to western Aleutian Islands with the strong winds there. And that wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment. Come back for the marine forecast.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is Dr. Earl Wainer. Dr. Wainer is a distinguished member of the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB. Member Wainer has an accomplished career in aviation as an engineering executive, safety advocate, industry safety spokesman, engineer, and pilot. He enjoyed a 24-year career with the Boeing Company where he held a series of chief engineer positions. Aside from his professional career in aviation, Member Wainer is an experienced commercial licensed general aviation flight instructor and charter pilot, in addition to owning a Beechcraft Bonanza. Member Wainer earned all three of his academic degrees in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan, his bachelor's degree summa cum laude, master's degree, and doctorate. Among his awards is a 1994 Laurels Award from Aviation Week, and in 2005 he was awarded the Honeywell Bendix Trophy for Aviation Safety. Welcome, Dr. Wainer.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Well, it's really an honor to have you on the program, sir. Can you maybe begin by describing the enormity of the aviation safety challenge from a national level? How many accidents, fatalities you're dealing with?
Well, if we talk just about general aviation, Part 91 flying, the NTSB investigates about 1,500 accidents a year, 1,500 accidents. About 1 out of 5 of those is fatal, so there's about 240, 250 fatal accidents, and that amounts to well over 400 fatalities annually in general aviation aircraft.
Dr. Wainer, we have had both Kathy Gagne and Chris Shaver, both members of the NTSB, on the show, and each of them brought with them their safety alert videos. Can you talk a little bit about that effort?
Be delighted to. Both Chris and Kathy are or have been regional investigators. And so they have been on scene to see the same accident over and over again in many cases. So we had a group of the regional investigators who got together and decided that they really wanted to try to put something together to get the message out to the general aviation community about some high-risk accidents types. So they developed the 5 safety alerts, brought them to the board, had the board review them and voted to adopt them. And so we published them as safety alerts on paper. Now, not to be outdone, when you have a motivated group of individuals like Kathy and Chris, they decided that with today's medium, it really needed to be in video. So they put together the videos, made the videos, did the narration, and they've been quite successful. Those videos have had a very good life. I'm going to be handing a number of those out at the Alaska Airmen's Gathering. And we will probably use that kind of format to get the message out to the community much more in the future.
Well, I've got to tell you, as an operator, I really appreciate the message and the emphasis of the two videos that I've seen. They're particularly applicable to Alaska flying. So I appreciate what the board has done in setting that up.
Those 5 videos are available on our website, ntsb.gov.
Good, okay. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, and we've talked about it in different ways on this program, is SMS, or safety management systems. One of the discussions you and I had briefly, though, was how that might apply to single pilot operations, either Part 91 or Part 135. Any thoughts there?
Well, safety management systems have been very successful on the commercial side, the airline side. Of course, they're naturally developed for that kind of audience. But there are really 4 aspects to safety management, and they apply whether you're talking about a large carrier or a single pilot. You have to have safety be important and emphasized from the top. Now, in the case of an airline, that means the CEO has to embrace safety and make sure his management does. But if you're a single pilot, it means you really need to pay attention to your attitude toward safety. Secondly, you have to look at your operation, what you do, and evaluate it from the point of view of what kind of smart things are you doing or what kind of stupid things are you doing. 3, you need to take a look at where your risks are. You know, what is it that could get you into trouble? And how do you mitigate it? How do you avoid it? How do you get out of it? So that's the 3rd, basically, post for safety management systems. Then 4th, you just have to promote safety throughout the whole organization. So that becomes easier if you're the single pilot and you're having your own safety management system. If you've got a large airline, it means you have to get the safety message all the way through all of your employees so that their job is safety first. But for a single pilot, it works.
Dr. Wehner, we've run out of time. I'd like to get you back on the program and talk about a couple of other things that I know interest you, one of them being angle of attack, indicators for general aviation. So we'll have you on next time, and I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed our program. Stay tuned next time, and we'll have Dr. Wehner back to talk about a very interesting new topic, or at least a topic of emphasis for GA, and that's AOA. Until then, fly safe.
Welcome back, and we'll get started by taking a look at the marine forecast for southeast Alaska on Tuesday. Southeast winds 30 knots in the southern inside and southern outside waters, 25 knots as we move further to the north, to 20 knots as we get along just south of the east Gulf Coast. Variable winds at 10 knots up along the east Gulf Coast. South and southeast winds 15 knots in the southern inside waters on up to the Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay area. On Wednesday, expect the winds to drop off in the southern outside waters to 20 knots. Same thing in the southern Panhandle. 15-knot winds. A little bit further north, there's going to be more variable winds as we get closer towards Petersburg, and then up into the Skagway area, the Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay. North winds 15 knots, and east winds 10 knots along that east Gulf Coast. For south central Alaska on Tuesday, expect generally light winds in Prince William Sound and along the north Gulf Coast. A little bit stronger winds as we get on up into the Cook Inlet region, and the winds are going to be light for the majority of the day. By the evening hours is when we're expecting these winds to come up. 20 to 25 knots in the Cook Inlet region, 15 to 20 knots through the Barren Islands, and same thing in Kodiak Island. These northwest winds will be picking up as we move on later into more towards the evening hours. Taking a look at the forecast on Wednesday, expect winds out of Prince William Sound north 20 knots, northeast 25 along the north Gulf Coast to 20 knots as we move south of Seward. Down through Cook Inlet, 20 to 25 knot winds to 30 knots over the Augustine area, with 25 knot winds south and east of the Barren Islands, and expect 20 to 25 knot winds around Kodiak Island and the Shelikof Strait area. For the Alaska Peninsula, generally light and variable winds can be expected across that region on Tuesday. By Wednesday, winds are generally staying pretty much light and variable, 10 to 15 knots or less across the entire region. For the Aleutian Islands, expect your winds to be a little bit stronger, well, not too strong over the eastern Aleutian Islands, about 15 knots, 25 to 30 knot winds as we move on out towards the Adak area, 35 knot winds in the Amchitka area out of the southeast, and expect your winds to be out of the east at 30 knots as we move on out towards Shemya. By Wednesday, winds drop off to 20 knots post-frontally in the Shemya area, 25 knots over the Amchitka area. In the Adak area, still winds are a little bit stronger ahead of the front, southeast 30 knots, 20 knots as we get over towards Nikolsky with 10 to 15 knots around the eastern Aleutian Islands. For the Bering Sea coastal waters, expect southeast winds 15 knots in the Pribilof Islands to 25 knots as we get up towards the St. Matthew Island region, 20 knots in the St. Lawrence Island region out of the south, light and variable winds along the Nunivak Island region. By Wednesday, expect the winds to stay pretty much light and variable in that Nunivak Island area, 20 knots in the Pribilof Islands, 25 knots as we get on up towards the St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island regions. For the Arctic coastal waters on Tuesday, expect your winds to be out of the southwest, about 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound to 25 knots along the northwest Arctic coast, and then west winds 25 knots from Barrow east and eventually up to 30 knots as we get over towards the Kaktovik area. Taking a look at that region for Wednesday, expect the winds outside of Kotzebue Sound to be at 20 knots again, 25 knot southwesterly winds along the northwest Arctic coast, and west winds 25 knots along the remainder of the Arctic coast from Barrow east. For a quick recap, taking a look at the forecast again for tonight, expect some rainy conditions in the southern panhandle towards Sitka, some foggy conditions along the outer coastal areas of the North Gulf Coast and Kodiak Island and the Cook Inlet region. We are expecting some snow up along the Arctic coast. From Barrow west tonight, basically an inch or two is possible. That's going to be moving to the east through the day tomorrow. Some cloudy, foggy conditions in the eastern Bering Sea. And then with our system out into the western Aleutian Islands and the central Aleutian Islands, rainy, windy conditions can be anticipated out there with that low pressure system. We're about out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.